Hey everyone, this video is going to take you through some of the highlights with chapter 16. And honestly, chapter 16 is one of my favorite chapters. It's extremely relatable, and it basically is just showing you all of the pieces that fit into the story of evolution or change in populations over time. All right, so one thing that you guys are going to be introduced to with this chapter is going to be basically fossils and the fossil record. So the fossil record is pretty awesome. It can show you how you get really big changes in life forms. So this chapter really focuses on the switch from life in water to life on land. So going from fish to tetrapods, which we are tetrapods. So the fossil record just kind of gives you a window into how some of those changes that are huge, they're drastic, but they tended to occur more gradually over time. And so you tend to find a lot of fossils that kind of show you the pathway and the progression of one species, changing over time into new species. So there is an infographic in your book that I kind of like. Basically, to be turned into a fossil, conditions have to be nearly perfect. So you're going to have some type of hardness to your body. So we have bones, we have teeth, things like that. So we would probably fossilize pretty well. However, if you are something that is a soft bodied organism, let's say like a worm or a leech or something like that, you're probably not going to leave a whole lot of trace behind that you were ever there. So even though the fossil record is amazing, it's not going to show every single organism that was present throughout the history of life on Earth. All right, so you guys have all heard about evolution. Evolution is just change in populations over time. And whenever Darwin was kind of working out this theory in his own mind, he referred to it as descent with modification. So basically, all living things are going to be related, and you'll have different species that are being pressured by natural selection, the environment, random events. And eventually, you're going to go from a single ancestral species, which, if you are looking at this tree of life here, that's going to be right there. So at one point, there was one cell that we all came from, basically, which kind of blows your mind to think about. And then through DNA analysis, they've been able to show that from this original ancestor, you have the three domains of life that we're familiar with today. So you have bacteria heading off this way, doing their own thing. You'll have a line that goes off this way. Very early on, you'll have a group of organisms called archaea that are going to branch off. Um, Visually, they look just like bacteria, but they do have some similarities with our cells, especially in the way that they process and handle genetic information. And then, if you keep going, you end up with us. We are just this tiny little area right here. So, kind of cool to think about descent with modification with a phylogenetic tree like that. All right, so this chapter, as I told you, it really shows you how you go from life that is primarily on land, not on land, life that is primarily on water, in water, to life that is going to be on land. So this was huge. So during this particular time in history, it's known as the Age of the Fishes. Um, Earth was very different than it is now. It was most areas were covered in water. You had huge, incredible diversity in aquatic animals and fish, particularly. Some of them were gigantic. I mean, you have these huge bodies of water, and that's pretty much where most of the living organisms are. You got lots of food, you can grow to a really large size. So you have some incredibly large fish. So if you are a fish, that's a little strange. And by strange, I mean you're going to be able to maybe hop up on land for a few minutes just to avoid some of the bigger predators. You're probably going to be more likely to survive and not be eaten. So natural selection is going to favor you. It's going to encourage your genes to be passed on, which is basically what is happening when we look at this Tiktaalik critter. So it's a transitional fossil. So it is going to highlight how you go from one type of life form to another type of life form. It's kind of filling in the gaps in the story of how you go from one extreme to another extreme. That's why they're so important, and they can shed a lot of light on the process of how organisms change over time. So with this particular guy, okay, he is still a fish at this point, Tiktaalik, but through studying fossils, they are seeing that he's developing a much sturdier structure. Okay, if you think about fish, they are swimming around in water. Water gives you buoyancy. You don't have to support your own weight. You don't have to have thick, sturdy bones. And if you've seen like fish bones and things like that, you know they're very delicate. But when you're starting to hop up onto land, all of a sudden you have to deal with gravity, which makes you much heavier than you would be in the water. So you're going to have to bulk up your bone structure quite a bit. You're also not going to be in the water. So you are going to have some problems with drying out or desiccating. So you're going to have some kind of way to help prevent drying up in the environment outside of the water. All right, so you think about fish, they've got gills. That's how they are going to be able to utilize oxygen. But if you are not in water, gills are not going to do you a whole lot of good. So these organisms were the ones that are going to be basically creating these very rudimentary lungs. So you think this guy actually may have had both gills and lungs. So it's very interesting. And then finally, limbs. So fish have fins, which is very different than like our arms, our legs. We are tetrapods. We have two pairs of matched limbs. So those are also going to be developing, and it's going to be the limbs that really are going to allow for further diversification later on from an evolutionary time frame. All right, and so while we were talking about like the limbs, right, this figure from your book is pretty cool. All right, so it shows you and let me zoom in here a little bit. There we go. All right, so if you check out the fish, all right, they're in this box over here. We've got the ray-finned fish, and then we have the lobed-finned fish. All right, so fish have fins. Fins are very specialized for movement through water. You can see that the bones are very fine. They're very delicate looking. They're not that sturdy. So, like if you fell on one, they'd probably break. But in water, obviously, they don't have to deal with that. So they're fine with that. However, you're going to start to have some fish where it's going to be advantageous, even in an aquatic environment, if you can kind of get to the bottom of a body of water, put a little bit of weight on your fins because they are still fins. Maybe you can lift yourself up to kind of look around for predators, prey. It's going to be an advantage. So you can see with the bones that are now colored that you're starting to have some pretty drastic changes that are occurring. Then eventually we have Tiktaalik. So not only can we bear weight in shallow water with these fins, we're also going to be able to support our bodies on the ground with gravity. So that was huge. You can see that there's further differentiation of the arm bones. Okay, and then, excuse me, whoops. Eventually, you are going to make it to tetrapods. So we have true limbs. You can see that the bones that make up these limbs even though they might have slightly different, like an amphibian, it's got more of like a web type of footing. We don't have that. And then you have birds. You've got the same basic bones that are there. They just have been modified by natural selection to suit the purpose or the role of that organism in nature. So you can go all the way from bearing weight, close to water, like amphibians. You can get away from water and stay more on land, like reptiles. You can even fly if you're a tetrapod. And then finally, we have the ability to actually manipulate pencils, pens, and if you play a musical instrument, if you are a surgeon, you can do all kinds of amazing things with the digits of your hands. And so this is just a cool infographic that is just showing you the transition that we've seen through fossil records going from fish to life on land, which are tetrapods. All right, embryology is also going to support Darwin's theory of descent with modification. So if you look at the early embryos, they look fairly similar. They're going to have some of the same structures. However, the adult organism is going to be very different. So this is another piece of information that really points towards descent from a common ancestor. All right, DNA is one of the last pieces of evidence, one of the most recent where we can really see how closely related two organisms are to one another. So basically, if you're using DNA as a way of analyzing evolution or how closely two organisms are, you're sequencing the base pairs. So, the guanine, cytosine, adenine, thymine, and then the more similarities that one species has with another, the more closely they're related. So you're going to have a lot more nucleotides in common with, your mom and dad than you would, like, I don't know, a totally different family. Even though you are all human, we're all Homo sapiens, and the more similar your genetics are, the more closely related you are. And so you can even extend that to other organisms. And so that's what DNA analysis is going to allow you to do. All right. So that's basically everything with chapter 16. Don't forget to watch the video where they are going through the discovery of Tiktaalik, the scientist that talks in the video. You can tell he loves what he does. And so it's a pretty interesting story. It's a very cool tale. And answer your worksheet, and then I will get those graded as soon as I can. And the next video that I'm going to make, and probably the last video, is going to be the one talking about your final paper, which is coming up. And I hope you guys have a great week.